Welcome to Behind the Game, the show about the business of sports and the people who bring the games to life. I'm Patrick Klinger. To my left is my co-host, my friend, the Commissioner of the Western Collegiate Hockey Association, and local sports legend, Bill Robertson.
Thanks, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone. Our guest today is the CEO of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx. Really good guy, and you'll really get to know him today and what he brings to the table with the basketball teams on both ends and at the Target Center. Ethan Casson, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it. Excited.
Well, we're going to get right into this. We got a busy show. We got lots of questions for you.
Great.
Nothing that will throw you for a loop, but I think the interesting thing is you bring a different perspective because you've been in the NFL and you've been in the NBA and WNBA, so you understand how different sports leagues work.
Yeah, it's been a really, the timing of today and with the Super Bowl just leaving the Twin Cities here the last couple of days, it's been a neat couple weeks, to your point, having worked both in the NFL and the NBA, having been part of the San Francisco 49ers when they hosted Super Bowl 50. To be back here in this role. We hosted 2 games during the Super Bowl week as well, so it was a really neat kind of viewpoint to have, having kind of lived in both worlds for a period of time. And I got my start with the Timberwolves in 1998, so to think an entry-level position from a kid that made a cold call to Target Center a long time ago could be back in this position is pretty special.
Tell us a little bit about that story, Ethan, if you would, please, and how you did get into sports. I've heard it, and I think it's a fascinating story of somebody with perseverance and some courage to pick up the phone and make a call.
Yeah, it's almost, it almost doesn't seem like it's real sometimes when I do talk about it, and I oftentimes get asked about it, certainly when I'm in front of kids that are looking to break into sports or people asking about the industry and the competitive nature that this industry ultimately represents. And I was, just a kid from the East Coast that played college basketball, knew I wasn't good enough to play at the next level, and started to begin to think what would be the next best thing. And this idea of working in professional sports kind of came to fruition. So I started just really strategizing on internships. And this is a long time ago when internships weren't nearly what they are today. I worked for the Boston Celtics in 1995, I believe. And that was, as a kid growing up in New England, that was the dream come true. Seeing Larry Bird walk down the hallway, or all the history, and that was actually right in the transition of them tearing down the Boston Garden. And it was at that point that I realized this is what I want to do, but I needed to develop and build a roadmap to go and do it. So by the time I had graduated and gotten out of school, I had done 6 professional sports internships. And to make a very long process short, it was a cold call that I did to the Minnesota Timberwolves. I would call every team and leave a voice message, and then every team that I left a voice message to, then I'd fax them my resume. And it was the Timberwolves and a woman inside of HR named Jean Sullivan who answered the phone one night in February of 1998. And this poor woman, I refused to let her get off the phone until she let me come out, and here we are. So it's a neat thing to start somewhere that was so important to you for 11 years of your life, and to be able to come back and take on the CEO position for the Timberwolves and Lynx organization. I'm forever grateful to Glen Taylor and everybody that has been part of that journey.
What a great story. I mean, you think about starting where you did and making all those calls and sending out and faxing your resumes at a day when faxing was a big deal. I do remember those days.
I was with the students at the University of Minnesota recently, the freshmen and sophomores in a class of sport management, and I realized as I was telling the story that they had no idea what faxes meant. I actually described the equipment that these things were in order to deliver what resumes ultimately ended up looking like.
Well, it's a success story for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell us about your biggest challenges as the CEO of 2 major professional sports franchises, and are they different with the WNBA and the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you guys know this better than anybody because you're experts in this space, and your reputations in this marketplace are as good as anyone's. It's so competitive, right? And we're competing for time, people's time. We're competing for people's discretionary income. We're competing for corporate dollars. And so when you factor all of that into a market our size, it's very, very challenging. And for me, it was less about coming back and trying to, let's say, compete with what was going on in and around us. It was more important to just look under the hood and make a determination what we were as a company, and then what I wanted us to look like as a company moving forward. And that involved a lot of different things. We kind of treated it internally like a transformation. So we rolled out a brand new logo, a brand new brand. The renovation was part of that story. What we did with our basketball team on the court was certainly a transformation if you start thinking about the additions of Jimmy Butler. And so you start to kind of layer on those different building blocks in hopes that, you know, there's something that comes to fruition, the team starts to perform a certain way, the fans start to feel a certain way, and now you're building a sustainable business that's not just competing on the court, but competing off the court, and contributing back to the community in which we reside, which is an important piece to this as well.
Sure.
Fantastic. You know, Ethan, the Lynx have been tremendously successful, great franchise, world champions. Timberwolves haven't had the best luck over the last 12 to 14, 15 years or so. How do you run one team versus another? How do you market one team, the men's team versus the Lynx, who've, you know, obviously have a little bit of a different audience perhaps than?
Yeah, I think to be honest, it's a luxury. In that we've got the opportunity to have two different professional sports franchises, two different groups of fans, if you will, and we're able to almost develop a 365-day story of our organization and what we're doing with those two teams throughout the course of the year. And certainly what you said is spot on. I don't know of a professional sports team, regardless of gender, that's been more successful in a shorter period of time than the Minnesota Lynx. 4 championships in 7 years, 6 final appearances in 7 years, and really capturing an entire market. If you've been to any one of those last Game 5s, you know, last year at Target Center with 19,000 people, which is the 5th largest crowd ever to watch a WNBA game, to this past summer at Williams Arena, or into the fall for Game 5 there, you're completely sucked into what these ladies do, how they play with one another, how they compete, and then you're drawn more even closer to what they're doing off the court and how available they are and what they're trying to contribute back to the community. So it's a great opportunity to have both, and then you turn the page and you're into the Timberwolves season, and it's about kind of the rebuild of what that looks like. So 2 different things happening at the same time, but both really opportunistic for us.
Well, if you look at some of the footage here of yourself, and I know this about you, having done research and having talked to you at several events, and Patrick and I talk about this a lot, you're about building relationships in the marketplace and with your sponsors, with the media, with your fans. Tell us about that and how you go about building those relationships from your angle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important thing that any of us can do. You know, it's the core of our business. If you think about what that relationship is with your season ticket members, what those relationships look and feel like with your corporate partners, again, going back to the competitive landscape that we're in, I've just always been a big believer in making sure you're always trying to do it the right way. And it's not around being perfect. It's not around doing things that don't, at times, you know, alienate or jeopardize some of those relationships. I'll give you an example. We've just gone through basically a pricing change that just hit the market recently. And there have been some fans that have been really vocal about that, and they should be vocal about that. They're part of our family, and yet those are tough conversations to have as we need to continue to build our business back to stay competitive, not just on the court, but stay competitive with pricing in and around our league. If you don't have those relationships, if they don't trust you, if they don't believe in you, those are much more difficult to have than being somebody in an organization that represents at least trying to do it the right way, even in difficult times.
Sure. You know, Ethan, you touch on the competition, and this marketplace is incredibly competitive. We've got every major professional sports team. We've got a Big Ten university with major sports. I think we're the 3rd per capita in the country in theaters. Phenomenal amount of attractions in a lot of ways that people can spend their discretionary dollars. How do the Timberwolves and the Lynx compete against all of the attractions that exist in the market?
I think certainly this is how we approach it. I mean, you have to have and find points of differentiation, right? And those are obvious, right, when you think of each team plays a different sport. But then there are other things about service and experience and technology and innovation and in-game and entertainment and all of those things that surround kind of the actual game that you want to determine what matters most to your customer and then really differentiate yourself. But it's difficult because we're competing for people's time and we're competing for a finite amount of discretionary income, and that's a real challenge. The one thing I would say, and I think you guys would echo this as well, this is a special sports community, not just because there's so many teams and so many different options. I think it's special because I think all of the teams have great relationships with each other. And that's something that I always thought about when I left in 2010, and certainly thought a lot about when I was coming back. As much as it is competing, every one of the teams, the executives inside those organizations, the leaders inside those organizations have a personal relationship with the other teams and are really willing to do whatever they can do to help out. And we've all either been on the receiving end of that favor or that opportunity, or been the deliverer of those different types of things. But I think that's really different to maybe this town than others.
How about Glen Taylor, when you took this job as the CEO coming back after interning? That relationship and how that formed. I assume when you were interning, you didn't get a lot of interaction with him, but maybe you had a few from time to time,
Yeah.
and then you worked for the 49ers and you may have seen him. Just like to know how that relationship has gone and how that's developed for you.
When I started, and it was let's call it a grade up of what an internship looks like. I actually got paid, but when I started in an entry-level capacity in 1998, it was about professional growth, but it was also around trying to navigate my way through the organization and continue to grow professionally, take on more responsibility. I was fortunate enough to start on the corporate side in corporate sponsorships, and then moved into corporate sales and then management roles inside the organization at that period of time. So over an 11-year window of time, certainly being on the corporate side, it gave me probably more face time with Glen, just based on the types of things that we were working on and the things that he would be more active in, development of relationships, our naming rights, et cetera. So that was enough to establish at least a rapport, certainly not like we have now. It was a wedding in April of 2016 that we happened to both be at. And it was a mutual friend. And we were seated at the same table, the reception part of the wedding where the ceremony's over and you're sitting with a group of people, some people you know, some people you don't. And to my left is Glen Taylor and Becky Taylor, and my wife Lisa was with me. And it was an incredible night because we talked really more about how things were going for me in San Francisco. And then we started talking about family. We started to talk a little bit more about what was going on inside the Timberwolves organization, and this was certainly after the tragic passing of Flip. And I think Glen was in a place where he was really thinking about his legacy and the idea of change and what would change ultimately lead to, both on the court and on the business side. And so it was just a great conversation that became very personal. And if you know anything about Glen, beyond being one of the more approachable, kind people you ever meet, he doesn't differentiate one from the other, right? Family and personal is professional to him. And I think that's why he has the reputation he has. So that night led to a couple of follow-up conversations, and before you know it, he had called and said, I'd like you to be the CEO of the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx. And my wife was as excited as I was because she got to move back home. You guys know this. If you marry a girl from Minnesota, she's coming back to Minnesota at some point or another. So here we've been here 16, 18 months, and it's been really neat.
Fantastic. Well, Glen made a great choice.
Oh, appreciate it.
He deserves a tremendous amount of credit for saving the franchise in a time that it looked like it was headed out of Minnesota.
Yeah, 1994, right, in New Orleans, and a guy that very few people knew in the sports space came out of nowhere and purchased it, and is also, to his credit, been the one that's been the most supportive of our WNBA team and our Minnesota Lynx. You see him and Becky sitting courtside every Lynx game as you do every Timberwolves game, and that hasn't necessarily happened in other markets. with NBA owners, and I give them a lot of credit for supporting all of that, diversity, inclusion, and really the opportunity for two franchises to grow and blossom as best they can here in the Twin Cities.
One of the challenges, Ethan, of being a sports executive is you can't control what happens on the court, right? You wish you could, but it's beyond your control.
Yep.
You can do all the things, you put all the pieces in place, do everything right, but ultimately it depends on what the players are doing down on the court. As a leader of two organizations, how do you keep your staff motivated when times are a little tough, when maybe the team isn't performing the way that you hope that it would?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's interesting because the team is performing well right now. So the opposite of that is to make sure that the staff isn't just married to performance on the court and wins, or the idea that we'd finally break into the playoffs, which certainly is our hope. We've won 12 home games in a row at home. I mean, again, that's not even a statistic that is talked about as much as it should be right now. And yet it's happened. I think we have the second best home record in the NBA, which is a phenomenal thing. But you're right, the outcome of that product is in none of our controls. There's an expression we use inside of the NBA communities and some of the colleagues that I'm closest with. It's called 50 win ready. And if you think of a schedule of 82 games, 50 wins tends to be that number that means you've had a successful year, that you've had a year that's including the postseason, potentially hosting a home playoff series. So I think our mindset in our organization is if we're always 50 win ready, whether or not that ultimately happens or not, we're ready to respond if we're 50 win ready, but we're built to perform when and if that potentially happens. So I think it's just keeping that mindset that our business shouldn't change necessarily because LeBron James hit a buzzer beater with 1 second left on the clock the other night, which was painful to watch. And yet there's plenty of games this year that have been just incredible for us to watch. You've got to keep kind of a balance to that staff and making sure that we're kind of 50 win ready regardless of the outcome of the record.
So I take it then you're really preparing for the 2018 NBA playoffs for the Timberwolves right now.
Yeah, I mean,
what goes into that?
Yeah, no, it's I don't know if there's wood. Can I knock on this here?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's the direction this is headed, which is, incredible. It's been 13 years. Again, let's go back to how competitive of a marketplace this is. Of all the local teams, I'd love to pull the statistic of how many of those local teams have participated in a postseason game or series in our 13 years that we haven't been in a post-game series. I would bet quite a few would rack up. It's the second longest drought in North American sports. A statistic and talking point that I hope to not be associated with here in the next coming months. But yeah, we are internally having conversations now about what does that look like and making sure that our fans are ready, the market's ready, our brand is ready. And we're celebrating it appropriately. And I think, going back to conversations about increased ticket prices and some of the difficult years that we've had, it will be a great celebration for our customers and our members and the local community to finally see us in an environment that certainly feels more successful than other years.
Ethan, there's been a lot of discussion about analytics in sports, certainly as it relates to what happens on the field or on the court. How are analytics shaping the business side of sports and maybe the way that you're approaching marketing and business development? Yeah,
it's no question a focal point of every team, or every team that's trying to compete. The word that comes to mind is customization. And the better we know our customer, the better experience we can provide our customer. And so data and analytics are keys ultimately for us to getting better information, more information around what a fan is doing at Target Center, what are they eating at Target Center, when are they getting to Target Center, what's their favorite player, when did they buy a jersey, all of the behaviors that take place that shape a decision. Data and analytics are helping us support that. We've invested heavily in the last 16 months in a business intelligence team, and really it's a group of people that are just constantly scrubbing data and looking for any advantage or any better viewpoint of visibility into what we do. Our schedule, for instance, is something we take a great amount of time in, right? When do we play somebody? What time do we play? What's the pricing of that game versus the pricing of a different game? Everything from television ratings to game schedule to ingress and egress, right? How long does it take a fan that gets to Target Center 20 minutes before tip versus 40 minutes to tip? We're able to kind of dial in to the specifics of all of those different things, and then in turn provide them solutions back to it. So it's changing the game. It's certainly impacting people's revenue streams, which I certainly think is an important piece, a big piece of all this. But it's about their behavior and the customization of their behavior. We've recently rolled out a new mobile app, and being a building that's a paperless building, and much has been written about the Timberwolves and Target Center not having paper tickets or hard tickets, a pain point that I think caused several people to be disappointed with a couple of years ago, has now worked to our advantage. 82% of everybody that comes through Target Center's turnstiles is using mobile. So what does that mean to us? It means that those folks using mobile, or those folks that transferred their tickets to their neighbor or their work colleague, we now know who these people are, and we're able to do more things for them because we understand who they are better. No chance to do that with a paper ticket. No chance to do that with business intelligence teams, or not having business intelligence teams, or not having the data and the analytics to support those decisions.
Interesting. I've used the paperless tickets at Target Center for a Timberwolves game, and the first time I was a little apprehensive, but once you get the hang of it, it's all good.
It's pretty seamless, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a little bit of that anxiety walking up to the gate, wondering, are they going to let me in?
Right.
And then you realize that you're in. I think, again, if you think of this, I mean, it's the direction every industry is headed in. It's why the airport and how we travel has changed. How we order a Starbucks is certainly changed. And for us to think that 8.5 people or 8.2 people of 10 are in a mobile space, imagine what we can do to that customer's experience. And I actually think we've just scratched the surface. I'm talking about in arena, but what are we doing with these people out of arena? Push notifications, contesting, sweepstakes, things of that nature, because they're connected to us and we know who they are. I think we've just scratched the surface on what that looks like.
Agreed. Now, on the court, Patrick alluded to, you really can't control what happens if the Timberwolves win or the Lynx win, but
Yeah.
Your coach, very dynamic. I worked with him in his first go around with the Timberwolves when he was an assistant. And he came from Harvard University and was green to the NBA, but very much a basketball guy. How do you work with him when you want to do business objectives, or you want him to understand what you're trying to do? I'm sure that is sometimes easy and sometimes hard, and I think our audience would love to know how that relationship works.
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge because, again, as you guys know better than anybody, and those that work in professional sports, right, there is a little bit of church and state. That's the way in which these organizations have been built since the beginning of time. There's been a business side, and then there's been the team side. And I think for a long, long time, there were always, everybody kind of stayed in their own corner. But as we've evolved as organizations, as we've evolved as businesses, as the complexities of broadcast deals and the competitive landscape of sports has changed, the better organizations are the ones that are run a little bit more collaboratively. I don't think it's by accident that the Golden State Warriors, for instance, beyond being maybe one of the greatest teams ever assembled, certainly it looks like that's where it's headed, don't also have a great working relationship with their business operations, their general manager, Steve Kerr, Rick Welts, who's the CEO, right? So it's those organizations that have found that collaborative way to go about it that are really succeeding on all cylinders. And I think with Tom and myself, getting to know each other last summer was probably a little more challenging because he was part of the Olympics and one of the assistant coaches in the Olympics. So by the time he got back and I started, right, we were in the middle of training camp. And at that point, it's really giving the basketball team whatever they need, the space they need to prepare for the upcoming year. And then we were off running with a pretty intense game schedule. this off season, we spent a lot of time together, and we talked quite a bit about philosophy and balance and the role that business plays with basketball and the role that basketball plays inside of our community, and the renovation, and even the branding things we brought to those guys. Meaning, sometimes it's about getting buy-in or getting insight to maybe what the players want the jerseys to look like. And if you've seen some of the reactions that they've had to the new designs, they're very much part of that, the final outcome as any project we've ever worked on together. So this past summer together was really great for us. And he's intense, and he is somebody who I don't know if I've ever met works harder at his craft. I don't know if I've met anybody that's more prepared relative to game film and time spent just making sure that everything has been considered in preparation for the game, and we've enjoyed getting to know each other. We're both very competitive. We both understand the circumstances of the history of our organization, having not been successful on a number of fronts, and so I think we're both pretty attached at the hip around wanting to turn this and have it become something that's sustainable for a long period of time.
I was at a speaking engagement recently where Coach Tibbs spoke, and he was asked by somebody in the audience, he said, how do you stay balanced away from the court? And he said, what do you mean, between offense and defense? So it gives you just a little bit of a flavor of his intensity and how seriously he takes the game.
Yeah. The next question you should ask him is, what's his hobby? I think watching film is an answer that I've heard him use before. So,
Ethan, we're just about done today. And again, thank you for joining us today. The Timberwolves and the Lynx have been very active in the community.
Yeah.
We just saw clips a couple of moments ago of some of the work that your players do in the community. Tell us, if you would please, about some of the key community initiatives for both of the teams.
Yeah, it's a responsibility that we have. You know, as oftentimes we look in the sports page and we find out whether or not all of our favorite teams won or lost, and yet, you know, we're a team, as are all the teams really, that have ownership to our community. You know, I oftentimes say we're a family-owned business, but publicly traded. And publicly traded meaning that, you know, it's the fans and the community that are the ones that are supporting the franchises here in this marketplace. And there's an obligation that we have back, a big obligation to give back. And what I've been most proud of, even early on in my time inside of this role with the Timberwolves and Lynx, is it's at the focal point of everything we do. It isn't just about getting you know, the Lynx players out in the community. It isn't just about getting our Timberwolves players back out into the community. It's about giving back to the community. Our staff is very invested in what that looks like. We have all staff day, you know, days in which we go off together as a staff and contribute. We've added a program at Target Center called the Giving Initiative, where every game, really from now till the end of time, we will be giving $5,000 away to a different charity, different foundation, different platform, as just a small token of our appreciation. So you never get it to a point where it's done. If anything, I want our staff to understand that there's a lot of things we've got to be great at, but if we're great at a couple things and that happens to be contributions back to the community, I'd be okay with that.
Perfect.
That's awesome. Ethan, thank you for being our guest today. This time went very quickly, and we want to thank you for coming on to Behind the Game.
And I want to thank you guys. I appreciate you having me, and thanks for all that you guys do as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah.
See you next time on Behind the Game.